Who will lead the call for America? Who will rise or fall? Give his all for America. Who's here to prove that he can? The Star Spangled Man with a plan. That's right, we're talking about Captain America today. Man, I couldn't be more excited about this. One of my favorite movies, my all-time favorite superhero. The first book I ever read was a Captain America comic. I'm so excited. I'm Joshua Noel. I'm here with a return guest. For those who have watched our YouTube series, The Comic Book Catch-Up, Andy Walsh was recently on there with me there, and I invited him back to kick this off. We've done some of our primarily political episodes before, so you guys should be familiar with the format, but we're going to be doing through March and April 8 bonus episodes. So just a series of bonus episodes in replace of what we did last year with our HBO series. We're just going to be doing more primarily political episodes to kind of get ready for this election year and talk about bigger themes in our fandoms, and hopefully provide a good example of what it looks like to talk about these things in a civil, responsible way. That's not just we hate your side, you hate our side kind of stuff. So without further ado, I can't wait to get into this. Andy, for these episodes, we would like to know, instead of what you're geeking out on, if you could share a favorite political figure from any story you've read. So it could be like a king or judge in the Bible, could be like one of the kings of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, anything like that. Do you have a favorite political figure you've read about?
Sure. So when I saw that question, and I saw that included judges from the Bible, one of the first people that popped in my mind was Gideon. So
Good pick.
great story there, right? Lots of drama. Gideon, demonstrates a lot of faith by doing things that seem a little bit unconventional. And sending home chunks and chunks of his army in a way that seems counterintuitive or possibly downright, suicidal. So that's all really compelling. But the other thing that I really like about the story of Gideon, right? So there's that initial part where God commissions him, and he's not really sure if he's hearing from God or not. And so he comes up with the whole thing with the fleece, and if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, and so forth, and vice versa. And that always struck me as somewhat scientific, right? Gideon is running negative controls alongside of his test or his experiment to see if God's really speaking to him, calling him in the way that he thinks that he is. So it's a neat little illustration of that kind of controls that you run in scientific experiments. So I always appreciated that aspect of Gideon as well.
Man, that's a great pick. Quite the opposite of what I'm gonna pick. I'm not picking because I think he's a good political leader. I'm picking most entertaining political guy I've read. Crocodile from the One Piece manga. Guys, he is just so evil in the way he uses politics to just kind of manipulate an entire country to his will, and he uses his powers to force a need that only he can supply the answer to. It's like wicked in such a clever way that I'm like, man, sometimes you just gotta appreciate a good bad guy, and man, he's the worst. so so yeah, quite the opposite. I like watching him. I like watching him lose. Like I like
Mm-hmm.
how much control and power he has. And then here's Luffy, who doesn't know anything. Like he doesn't understand what kind of different devil fruits or anything is yet. He just knows what this guy's doing is wrong, and I'm gonna stop it. And it does, and you're like, yeah, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. That's all. All right. So I did want to real quick shout out one of our patrons, one of our supporters, Aaron Hardy. Thank you so much for making this show possible. And everybody listening, if you could rate and review our show on Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate that. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like and subscribe button, please. And if you want to hear more episodes like this, you can go down in the description. We'll have a link to all playlist of all of our episodes that are part of the primary political series that we're doing. So, without further ado, let's jump into the main topic today. My man, Captain America, uh, the man with a plan. Guys, he's my favorite superhero. I really couldn't say enough about like my relationship to Captain America. I grew up reading Captain America comics. I will forever maintain that Ed Brubaker's run is some of the best comics that's just ever been written. Um, yeah, I love him. I love him. I loved the movies from beginning to end. They've always been some of my favorites. He's been one of my favorite characters. So much so. Here's my geek cred card. Before the movies got popular, back in the day when no one knew who Captain America was other than comic book fans, I got a dark blue hat. I had to have my uncle sew on a patch for me. So I have a Captain America hat that I wear around that everyone now, the movies are out, it's like, oh man, where'd you get that? And I'm like, man, we had to make this thing. Like, this didn't exist when I got it. So that's my geek cred. I've been a fan for quite a while, and I wear that hat pretty regularly. Yesterday, I was wearing the hat, the Captain America shirt, Captain America socks, and just decked head to toe. And it wasn't for any special occasion. It's just I have that much Captain America stuff. Andy, what's your relationship with Captain America?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan for a long time too. Maybe not that devoted, but I remember having a Captain America action figure as a kid, and some kind of Captain America branded like motorcycle and sidecar that he could ride on. Um,
Fantastic.
and that was one of my favorites among my superhero action figures. The first Captain America comic I remember reading, my grandparents had this collection of like villain origin stories. So there was like the first appearance of Loki and Doctor Doom and all that. I think that one had the Fantastic Four story where they go back in time and the Thing winds up as Blackbeard the pirate. And in that collection was an early Captain America story where he gets brainwashed by the Red Skull or something like that to go and he's going to go and assassinate somebody. But of course, he's Captain America, and so he overcomes the brainwashing and defeats the Red Skull. And so I remember reading that book regularly when I was over at their house, just kind of checking out all the different revisiting all the different stories. And then certainly like you said, that Ed Brubaker run, read that as it was coming out. That was excellent. And I've been day one MCU fan. So yeah, love the Captain America movies. Chris Evans has been great. I think that was inspired casting. And
oh yeah. No, I think when the Avengers movies really started, I was too young to know a lot of things. So the only reference I had of Chris Evans was that Human Torch punk kid, and I'm like, he can't be Cap. What are you talking about? Man, was I wrong. Even like honestly, I'm not on Twitter anymore, but for a while when I was on Twitter, even like following just Chris Evans tweets, you're like, this guy might actually just be Captain America.
yeah. I think he is slowly, just he and Robert Downey Jr. have slowly sort of merged. It's hard to tell where the character ends and the actor begins.
Oh man, there was after Les Miserables came out, Hugh Laurie was part of it, like a little spoof song. So in the movie they have the "Am I Jean Valjean or am I, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
He did "Am I Hugh Laurie or am I Wolverine?" And I thought it was so great, especially now that he's come back as Wolverine. I'm like, yeah, honestly, dude, you're Wolverine.
Yeah, was that when he hosted the Tonys?
It might have been. I don't know. It was funny though.
Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, so Captain America, we're going to be focusing on the MCU version. But his story has always been political, right? Like ever since issue 1, it's been a political series. And today when we're talking about the movies, we're going to be talking mostly about themes of like government mistrust, what freedom really means in democracy, how much government oversight should be acceptable, that kind of stuff. But I want to throw out Captain America issue 1 was released months before Pearl Harbor. And for those who don't know, the cover photo Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger over here on YouTube for those watching. Yeah, it's him punching out Adolf Hitler, right? Right. This issue comes out months before Pearl Harbor, in an attempt to get the attention of the American Congress and be like, "Hey, we need to be part of this war. We need to join the Allies." In the comics, America was part of the Allies way before we actually were part of the Allies. So, yeah, yeah, I think it would be a hard sell to say that Cap has ever not been political. There's
Sure.
even a rumor that they brought issue 1 to the Congress table and like read it in Congress. So I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard it a few different places. I like to believe it's true. So I'm gonna say it is. Yeah. So with that, we're just gonna go ahead and jump into the movies here, and what all they have to say, starting with the first Avenger, all the way through the Avengers movie, proper. We're going to talk about um, Captain America, the first Avenger. What? How would you summarize the plot of this one, Andy?
Oh, okay. Well, Steve Rogers is, like many people of his generation, he's seeing the war happening overseas, and wants to do his part. Knows that his brothers, his fellow countrymen are already over there, some of them, and I imagine that he feels some sense of brotherhood with all of humanity, right? So he sees that there's a fight for a just cause that he wants to participate in, but he's just not physically able to, and so he volunteers for an experimental program to be able to do something about that, not really even knowing what it is, just knows that it's an opportunity for him to do his part. Uh, Winds up with superpowers, essentially, enhanced strength, speed, all that kind of good stuff. Kind of peak human, right? So he's not Superman, but he's sort of like the best possible human being that a human being could be. But there is some sabotage during the process, and it winds up that he's the only person. He was supposed to be the first of many, but he winds up being the only super soldier. And so they decide that the best thing for him to do is to lead a war bonds campaign rather than to actually risk him overseas, right? Because he's just one. He's sort of this special, valuable resource, irreplaceable. So they want to protect him. So they put him in charge of um, or they put him in front and center in this war bond initiative, and then some USO tour kind of stuff as a symbol rather than a fighter. But his best friend from his Brooklyn neighborhood winds up in trouble in the war. He's actually fighting, winds up in trouble. Steve finds out about it and decides that he can't sit on the sidelines anymore, defies orders, goes and rescues his buddy, and in the process uncovers a plot by Hydra scientists to take it to harness the power of the Tesseract, uh, which looks an awful lot like a cosmic cube from the comics. To harness the power of this object for basically unlimited weapons of mass destruction, and so he uncovers their plot, finds out that they're going to bomb all these cities, and realizes he has to stop this plot at any cost. And I think that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's very much. So he starts off really scrawny and weak, like you were mentioning. He wasn't physically able, and once he gets the super soldier serum, I thought they did the CGI and stuff with that really well. Like I think you can really tell that transformation, and it doesn't look like super obviously edited. I feel like for the most part, so I like how they were able to manage to do it. A lot of it was close to the comics. I mean, they changed a good bit. What I liked a lot though was the when they were doing the War Bonds campaign, and he was part of that little play with the song that I quoted from the beginning, right? Right,
Mm-hmm.
the Star Spangled Man, and how he punches out Hitler in the campaign, because that's kind of a nod to the comic book. I was like, okay, that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
fun. That was nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Um.
solid adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty great. Um. But with that, so that brings up the first political question I guess I would want to ask. So that first comic book, as well as the War Bond campaign, it's just straight up war propaganda, right? So, but it's weird when we think about war propaganda. Usually, we're just like, oh, that's bad. We don't like that. But when you put it in context of Hitler's literally the bad guy, it's kind of a little bit harder to think of like, is it bad war propaganda? Like, is it always bad? I guess is the question. Andy, how do you wrestle with these kind of thoughts and stuff?
Right. I mean, underlying that, I suppose, is the whole question of, uh, just war theory, and is there ever a time and a place for war? Period. Right. And if there is, then some amount of promotion or rallying to the cause of that war is easier to justify if the war in itself is justified. And World War II is always the first on anybody's mind of, if there was ever a just war, surely that meets the criteria. Obviously, there are people for various reasons, including religious or theological reasons, reject the notion of a just war and would uh, wouldn't even include World War II as an option. But so I think most people who are willing to entertain the idea of a just war would say that that's the most obvious example in less and less living memory, but certainly in the sense that something that's well known to everyone from their elementary and school education and so forth. Right? There may be other wars in the past that we're less familiar with that were equally well characterized, along moral lines, but that's certainly the one that everybody goes to now. And what we see in the film is perhaps propaganda light, or it's easy to again that objectively you Hitler is doing things that violate various standards of international rule, although maybe some of those came afterwards because of that. But but it's hard not to retroactively look back and say, what they were doing was just flat out wrong. It was bad. And so the fact that the Germans and Hitler in particular are characterized as sort of mustache twirling evil in those little plays is easy to accept, right? Easy to swallow, because we believe that is real, that's true. But it definitely is playing with that line of, in other contexts, right? We demonize people, we other people as a way of making it easier to justify violence against them, and that isn't the right way to go. And the fact that it's Hitler makes that easier to overlook. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say, oh yeah, that sort of thing is in general okay, because we've seen lots of examples where that's misused, and where that is done in such a way that it's misrepresenting other fellow human beings.
Yeah, yeah. The Just War theory stuff's interesting. So, I tend to be closer to like Augustine's version of Just War, that where I see this. Uh, I feel like if you see other people being oppressed and you can do something about it, you should do something about it. you know, and I do understand why people disagree with that. War necessitates killing, and anytime there is killing, that is ending the life of someone who was made in the image of God. Like I think theologically, I do understand people being against war in general. I just tend to think more of almost like a weight and balance. I feel like a just war, when you're going after those who are oppressing others, it should only be justified if basically you're freeing more lives than you're taking, if that makes sense. Um, because at the end of the day, if you don't do that war, more lives are actually at stake. Even if they'll live but they're oppressed, that's not really living. So that's where and it's a difficult subject. Like, I'm not saying, I don't even think World War II was easy call by any means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's weird to me when we're talking about like the propaganda part, though, this is what I've been trying to pinpoint for myself. when I think of the Captain America issue 1 being made to make a statement that we should be in a war, in my mind, that's free speech. That's a good thing. I'm glad that was out there because it was a viewpoint that needed to be expressed. But at the same time, I have a real problem with, and y'all know I love Disney. I'm a big Disney nerd. I hate how Disney used Donald Duck as war propaganda. How they had him in all the Navy commercials, and kind of, I think probably it's because it was appealing to kids, and also because I think the government actually was helping Disney pay for their stuff. So it's kind of like that to me. I don't like that. That war propaganda, that's gross. But this issue 1 that wasn't issued by the government really was someone like expressing their own viewpoint. To me, I'm like, that I get. That's a little bit easier for me to stomach. Does that make sense?
Sure, I think that's a reasonable distinction to draw, and I imagine that you're not alone in drawing that line, right? That being uncomfortable
Yeah.
With the government, sort of recruiting Disney and others to help them in their effort, right? And there is something uncomfortable about, in general, right? We know that, and again, looking at the modern lens, the contemporary lens of Disney is just super slick at advertising, right, and getting kids to be hooked on their stuff from, it almost seems like from in the womb, right? These kids are hooked on the Disney princesses and the different things. And so it's easy to be uncomfortable with that and to kind of project that back on, putting that in the service of a war campaign, or advertising for war essentially, and recruiting young people into the army. I think it's reasonable to have some reservations about that. At the same time, it's what else do we expect the government to do, right? They're not going to, we have decided collectively that this is a worthwhile thing to do. How else do we go about marshaling the forces for it, right? There's going to be some amount of enticement, some amount of advertising, some amount of trying to make it seem like a good idea, like the right thing to do, right? Is there a difference between trying to recruit people for service in the army versus encouraging people to plant victory gardens or to donate various supplies that the war effort? Like I think we tend to view that as a somewhat more benign activity, right? Because it's marshaling sort of collective action in service of others, right, or to help out the greater good, kind of thing, right? I don't know that I've seen as much critical of like those kinds of campaigns, but doesn't it's kind of fits in the same category of it's advertising / propaganda for a war effort, right?
Yeah, and even like just thinking of myself still, I guess there's a lot of nuance here because I'm even thinking of I love the Three Caballeros. I think it's a hilarious movie. It's an acid trip at the end, but it's funny. It's entertaining. The music's pretty good. I don't like some of the misogyny in it, but whatever. It was made in a certain time and place. But that movie was definitely that was still war propaganda. It was just America trying to reach out to the Brazilians and other South American countries to have them on our side instead of having them join the other side. So they were trying to like build this bridge of, hey, look, these people are cool too. And for some reason that seems better to me, where I'm like, I still don't love that, the government's hands in Disney, but at the same time it's like, if the end result is you just trying to be nicer to another country and teach kids that these other countries have something to add and of value to the world, that seems good still. Like it's hard to draw just a hard line of, is this good or bad war propaganda,
Right.
Yeah. So with that, we gave no one any answers, as I always do. Christian's listening and he's infuriated because he's like, oh, Josh is just doing that thing where he doesn't give us answers. You're right, Christian, and I'm going to keep doing it. As we go ahead and move over to, when you ask me what my favorite movie is, depending on the day, I'll give you one of three answers. It's really a three-way tie between Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Star Wars: A New Hope, and Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. So I love a chance to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies. This was one of the few times, actually it's the only time in my lifetime that a movie's been in theaters that I was genuinely surprised by what happened. I truly did not expect them to bring Hydra back or any of that stuff. Like, I thought it was too comic booky. They weren't going to go there. Man, they went there. They went there. So Captain America, Winter Soldier, it's his best friend Bucky from the first movie turns out was frozen, had mind control. He keeps getting put on ice, being brought out as like an assassin. At the same time, the American government is developed a program to see who are potential threats and take them out before they do bad things. So we know, I think Stephen Strange was on that list. This was the first time his name was mentioned was during this movie. But they had like a list of people who, these are people we're watching, and we're going to be able to use this program to tell when they're about to do something bad and stop them before bad things happen. And the idea was it's just going to add to safety because no one will do the bad things. I'm oversimplifying it. But that was kind of the government's plan. Nick Fury was a part of that. And Steve Rogers is like, hey, wait a minute. That's not freedom. Holding a giant gun to everyone's head is not freedom. And to him, freedom was more valuable than safety. So he didn't like that. He was going against that. At the same time, he's dealing with this Winter Soldier storyline. Of course, in the end, what happens is the government, who had these giant guns they were about to point at everyone's head, has actually been infiltrated by Hydra. Hydra has managed to stay alive this whole time. The people who worked with the Nazis, they're back. They're in the American government. They're in S.H.I.E.L.D. They're everywhere. And Cap's basically having to start an uprising and, as Barney would say, nip it in the bud. Before they actually get too much control. And I think, at the end, it's kind of like, look, Cap was right. We shouldn't give the government the ability to do stuff like this. And that actually kind of feeds into the Age of Ultron Avengers 2 storyline, where Iron Man's like, I'm going to build an armor suit around the whole world. And that way, we'll be protected. And, of course, by building a giant weapon that can, navigate the whole world, he put the whole world in danger. And Cap was, of course, really mad at that, too, because he's like, this is bad. We don't want this kind of thing. So a lot of times, you have the storylines from the Captain America movie feeding into the Avengers movies. I think this is a really good example of that, where the MCU is struggling with the idea of how much government oversight is too much government oversight. And is safety and freedom at odds with each other? And if so, which one's more important to you? I thought it was really well done. I loved the story. I loved the Hydra reveal. I loved Nick Fury's fake death in the movie. Like, it's just a fantastic movie. But anyway, to get more to some of the themes here, I'm gonna throw it to you. See what you think. Do you think government prevention is the same thing as government control? So, like, how they were trying to prevent evil from happening by, having these things that were monitoring us with some kind of program. Is that the same thing as government control?
That is an interesting question. Right, and it's one of the challenges with these movies is sometimes they take things that are so over the top, right? That it's easy to pick a side. It's easy to to say, oh yeah, you shouldn't put giant guns in the sky and just start shooting down citizens that have committed no crime just because your predictive algorithm says that they might someday. Right, but then okay, so that's a metaphor. So then what do you map that onto? And then it's easy to map that onto things that are not so cut and dry, but you've carried over that, obviously. Right, so when you're talking about like prevention, and I'm trying to think about like the real world, I think one of the first things that popped into my head, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, right, but like seatbelts, right? We have laws that require you to wear seatbelts. That is a form of government control in a sense, right? They are dictating how a choice that you make, and they're not necessarily nobody's sitting in your car and putting it on for you, right? So there is some level of you could choose not to wear the seatbelt, and incur the penalties if you're caught, and incur the consequences if you're in an accident. And so you're not completely eliminating my ability to choose, but there's a certain amount of coercion there, um, through the force that the government has, uh, and but it's also in the service of preventing harm, and serving public health, um, and so in that concrete example, or that more real world example, it's hard for me to say that to draw a line there. So I think it makes me wonder. Yeah, I'm not sure that there is a way that
Mhm.
the government can encourage, uh, either incentivize positive things or discourage negative things without uh, without the ability to frame it as some kind of control, right? If we accept that control isn't absolute, right? There's never going to be a way for the government to just absolutely make you do something, right? We don't. It's not like mind control or any of these things that in the comics where your choice is completely eliminated. There will always be some amount of you could just break the law, or you could do whatever, um, but recognizing that control can have degrees, right? That any sort of like incentivization or disincentivization or coercion represents some form of attempt at control. Um, then yeah, I think it's hard to imagine how the government could prevent something, or have a program to prevent something that we all just even if we all decide that it's bad, right? If the government is exerting is putting its thumb on the scale there, I think you could call that a form of government control. Whether that's a negative thing, a benign thing, a benevolent thing, right? Maybe we shouldn't have quite so strong a connotation, negative connotation on the word control. But yeah, I think I would say that uh, that represents some kind of control.
Mm. So I'm gonna attempt to make every side of our political spectrum in America mad at me all at once. 'Cause I think you can map this onto a bunch of different issues. And I'm going to go back and say I think the problem in this is actually I would be less concerned about the government and more concerned about AI. I don't trust computers that much. But yeah, I mean, you can map this onto, on one hand, like the social media stuff right now, right? Where you see a lot of certain senators and governors in our country who are wanting to ban social medias from being able to censor people. Um, and for those who don't know, I am attempting to go to law school. I'm in a paralegal program and stuff now. I study law a lot. The problem is all your social media things are private entities. So anything posted is in part their own speech. So they get a lot of control over that. And a lot of times you have the government trying to force them to basically make it an open platform where anyone can say anything. And that's problematic for a lot of reasons. One is then the government is controlling the free speech of that social media private entity. But you also have this whole, um, if everyone's allowed to just say anything and do whatever, as a lot of studies have shown on Instagram, there's a lot of harm coming to people. A lot of people's self worth being brought into question. You have people who are being verbally attacked and abused over these mediums. False information getting out and corrupting our whole nation. Like it's like maybe there should be some censorship there, and maybe it shouldn't be from the government, right? So I kind of see that on the one side, but you can also map the same issues that are brought in this movie into gun control today, right? Um, yeah, I mean, pretty point blank, that is safety versus freedom, right? Right? And if someone is out there and they're saying crazy things, they haven't passed a mental health exam, they're checking all these boxes where you're like, hey, this could be a serial killer. I think it's okay to, or not a serial. This could be a mass shooter kind of situation, whatever. Someone who's mentally unstable. I think prevention's okay. Let's not give that guy a fully automatic weapon, right? um, and that's where in I'm in. I support your freedom to bear arms, but I also in a common sense gun laws should just. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to get those through and pass those, right? Um, and again, this is just my views on our specific political situation here, and I know it's not the same everywhere around the world. But I'm looking at this going, yeah, sometimes prevention's okay because look at how much bad has happened because we haven't been doing any kind of prevention at all. So it's where I'm like, yeah, and sorry, you can again map this onto all kinds of different situations. I think within the context of the movie, you have this AI program that supposedly is just able to know when someone's going to do something bad and we're just going to annihilate them. I think again, you go down to killing someone made in the image of God. That's bad, right? And you're relying on this program being perfect. If the program is at all wrong, then you killed an innocent life. Or if the government can, manipulate it, and whether it's infiltrated by Hydra or we just have corrupt people in government in general, um, oh, we killed that person. No, trust us. He's definitely going to do something bad. Yeah, no, that's problematic, right? Right. So, and I think that's a lot of the things with our computer stuff today too. Is how have we been testing these programs, and how much reliance are we willing to put on it? I think those are big questions. I'm more concerned with the computer part of the question, I guess, than I am the prevention. Because to me, if we can be sure that we're preventing something, yeah, absolutely, let's prevent it. If we're not sure, I think it goes back to the same principle of proven innocent or innocent until proven guilty, right? So I don't know. I don't know. That's just a lot of jumbled up thoughts to again not give anyone a clear answer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, all of this is nuanced.
Sure. It makes me think of two things, right? One is, I think with emerging AI technologies, it's certainly reasonable to ask all kinds of questions of those. But I think it's also important to ask questions about, well, how have we been making decisions, and how reliable are those too, right? I mean, you bring up in the topic of gun
Yeah.
control, this idea that, well, we can figure out who are the people that shouldn't have guns and just keep them from having guns, right? And various mental health uh, diagnoses get tossed around in association with that. But how good, to me, making that the focal point of our gun control puts a lot of responsibility on individual gun sellers, or some other kind of community infrastructure to be able to identify these people, right? We have to have some process that identifies these people that, just like the AI that you described, right, is going to be imperfect. And so to me, it makes sense to have something a bit more broad spectrum, right, on types of guns and things like that. That's a little bit more easy to systematically enforce than this kind of, well, we're just going to pick and choose which people we think are okay to have which kinds of guns. I think that process is just as potentially flawed as if you were to assign an AI to that challenge. Just because we're more comfortable with human decision making doesn't necessarily mean that human decision making is superior in that case. But the other thing, it made me think of that I've been seeing recently is a lot of these questions of AI in education, and students. When is it okay? When is it not okay for students to use AI to help with their assignments? And then also, there are programs that are themselves built on the same kind of machine learning technology that teachers can use to say, does this text look like it was written by a computer? And there are some instances of schools or teachers using that as a unilateral, like, oh, you failed this AI check, you get a 0 on this assignment because it looks like, because one machine learning algorithm said that it looks like a different machine learning algorithm wrote your homework. And while it's, the stakes are much lower than a floating gun shooting you down in the street, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's a very absolute. We're trusting this AI absolutely to decide if you're cheating or not. And I think we're going to have to evaluate those kinds of policies, right? And this is all very cutting edge, emerging kinds of things. And I don't blame teachers for being like, well, I need something, right? I need some way of adapting to this very rapidly emerging situation. But it does feel a bit, it raises that same question of, well, what can that AI ever be wrong, and what are the consequences if it is, and do we need some way of ameliorating that process so that it's not so drastic when it is wrong?
And schools really are one of the best case studies when you're talking about this safety versus freedom thing, right? Not only with like the gun safety stuff I was talking about earlier, which again, the common sense gun laws. If you go to David French's stuff, he writes a lot about that, and I typically agree with him. I also do agree that we should do different types of gun control for not no one really needs a fully automatic weapon. That's a whole other conversation. With the schools, yeah, I think of like some states now are outlawing certain stuff being taught in schools, right? And they're kind of controlling what the teachers are allowed to say, even about their own personal life. So we're doing controlled free speech. Why? Because we think it's safer for the kids. Whether you agree or not, it's a whole other question. But it's kind of like that's a lot of government control because we think this maybe is safe. And then you also have some states where it's like the kids can come out with transgender or whatever to the teacher, and the teacher's not even required to tell the parents because they think that's safer for the kids. But it's also kind of like, wait a minute, we're overstepping the family. The government's overstepping the family at that point, which is that right or not? I don't know. But you do have to look at these things and throw up some red flags of what is more important here. Is it the safety? Is it the family? Is it the kids' own freedom? Where do we draw these lines? What do we think is the ultimate good in these situations? And do we even think the government should be deciding what the ultimate good is? You know? I don't have any good answers again, but I think these are all important things to ask and to think about. And I think those are the kind of questions that movies like this are really trying to trigger us to think about better. Trigger is probably not a good word to use in this context, but you know what I mean.
But I get you. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Prompt, encourage.
Yeah. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the last chapter with Steve Rogers, Captain America. The Civil War movie, Captain America Civil War, which kind of leads into Infinity War and Endgame. Some of what happens here, the repercussions really affect those big movies at the end of the Thanos Infinity Saga kind of stuff. Andy, would you go ahead and summarize some of Steve's story through Civil War through Endgame?
Sure. So Civil War, right? You alluded to already in Age of Ultron, the cracks were beginning to show between Steve and Tony, and as a result of the cataclysmic battle at the end of Age of Ultron, where a city is essentially dropped on a small Eastern European nation, and it's a little bit unclear, what the impacts of that are, but it's clearly visually impressive, right? Or visually sort of shocking, even if we don't know exactly what the toll in terms of human life is. And so a nebulous UN-like world government decides that superheroes need to be registered and tracked, and that their actions, they're going to be basically treated as the world police, and they're only allowed to go and act where this international oversight committee decides they're allowed to act. And Steve says, no, this is because of what he's seen in Avengers, right, where Shield was secretly stockpiling Tesseract-based weapons that to him looked exactly like what Hydra was doing in World War II. And then the council that oversaw Shield was ready to nuke New York City to stop the Chitauri invasion, right? And then the events of Winter Soldier, where the we just talked about, where that program was infiltrated by Hydra. Steve is just suspicious of that level of control, right? That it can be exploited, it can be put to nefarious purposes, it can be infiltrated. So he's kind of a fool me once, shame on me, or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of situation, right? I'm not going for this again. Whereas Tony has a lot of guilt about his involvement in the events of Age of Ultron, his involvement in the existence of Ultron, and so he thinks that there does, he's willing to sign up for this kind of control. So that puts them at odds. That puts Steve in a position of being a fugitive of sorts. There's also a thread involving Bucky, the Winter Soldier, and something personal that involves both Steve and Tony, and Steve naturally sides with his friend, um, and protecting him against this world government, this world committee of superhero oversight, and so that leads to a conflict between these two teams of superheroes that align on either side, and they end the film, you know, willing to keep a dialogue going, but not really able to work together, and that leads directly into Infinity War. Thanos comes, and the Avengers don't exist, and they're not there, right? And there's this rift between Steve and Tony, and between the two groups that aligned with them. So they're not able to come together when Thanos first arrives on Earth. Steve is a fugitive. Steve is and Falcon and Black Widow are kind of living in the shadows, doing vigilante stuff where they can, but sort of off the grid. And he ultimately, rallies. They each are trying to rally forces to stop Thanos, but separately. Tony winds up off Earth. Steve winds up working with Black Panther and Wakanda to put together a force to protect the Mind Stone in Vision's head in Wakanda. All of that fails because they're not able to coordinate and work together, and Thanos wipes out, gets all the Infinity Stones, wipes out half of life in the galaxy or the universe, in an effort to make a more sustainable world, and and that leads into Endgame. Steve and Tony have to put aside their differences. They're kind of among the last few standing heroes, and they have to find a way to bury the hatchet, so to speak, and work together. And not to spoil all the details, but I don't think anyone will be surprised to learn that they're able to do so. They come together. There's a great moment where the two of them are reunited along with Thor for a final Trinity showdown with Thanos before the cavalry arrives, and I wouldn't say everything is fixed, but certainly the lives of those half the people that were snapped out of existence, those people are brought back with a variety of repercussions that I'm not sure that they fully unpacked or resolved even now 30 years later.
Yeah, we're still wrestling with what happened with Infinity War and Endgame, where literally all of existence was snapped out because two grown men couldn't get along.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I love all these movies. Endgame's actually probably my least favorite of the three, ironically. I just I didn't like the time travel cop out. I was like, yeah, that just seemed like lazy writing. I'm sorry. I know.
When they said the phrase "time heist," that was to me one of the greatest two-word phrases in the English language. I was very excited by that concept.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. No, I mean I enjoyed parts of it still. I love Captain America being able to hold Mjolnir and just beat the crap out of Thanos. That was great. No, what's interesting with these movies, it's still building on that. Is government oversight, government control too much, whatever. I think at the end of it, because it's weird, depending on how corrupt the government is, kind of depends on who you feel like might be right? Like if the government was completely honest and good, man, Cap ruined a bunch of stuff for no good reason. And that's where you see, man, if Cap would have just went along, we could have made it through Infinity War, all that stuff. Later on, when you get to Falcon Winter Soldier and you see all the terrible stuff the government did during the snap, you're like, oh, no, maybe Cap was right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, whose side really? And I think a lot of it comes down to this utilitarian argument versus more of a principled argument, where there's a moment in Civil War where Tony is like, hey, I don't necessarily agree with this either, but if we join up now, we can control where this goes. We get a voice. If we don't, we're just going to be subjects. And Cap's like, hey, it doesn't matter what the end result is. It matters what is and is not right. And to him, to give all this power to a corrupt government was not right. even if you thought it might end up with a better result than standing your ground at that moment. Um, which of course they brought up the quote that Cap says about standing like a tree, except they have who was it? They have Peggy's daughter saying it, right? Am I
Niece,
thinking right?
yeah.
Yeah, niece. Yeah. But they still had the quote, which I thought was great. Standing like a tree next to the river of truth. And you're like, yeah, that's it. That is the Cap line for me. And and you see that here. Where is it principles or is it utilitarian? Is it we're doing what makes the most sense, the ends justify the means kind of thing, or are we let's stay by our principles because we don't necessarily know what the end is going to be. And for those who've listened to the show for a long period of time, know that I'm just against utilitarianism in general because I'm like, yeah, utilitarianism to me takes a lot of arrogance and you assuming you actually do know what the end result will be. If you don't have that level of arrogance and you realize you don't actually know what the end result will be, um, I think you got to just stand by your principles and your values. So here, that's what Cap does, and I like that. Even if you disagree with his values, he's standing by what he believes, and I think that's an important thing to do. Tony is more just trying to be practical, and here's what I think the ends is going to be. And actually, me and my best friend have been arguing since this movie came out on who was right, Cap or Tony. So I think they handled it pretty well. I don't think it's pretty clear on who was actually right at the end. um, whose side were you on? Did you have a side?
Um, I mean, in the context of the story, and especially with the Bucky of it all, it's hard to argue with Cap's decisions to protect Bucky, right? Um, and in and I think the folks on his team are a little bit more likable, and so it's easier to kind of root for them. Plus, they're set up as the underdogs and what have you. With the possible exception of Spider-Man, right? Who wants to root against Spider-Man,
Yeah,
especially
yeah, that's true.
teenage high school kid Spider-Man. But that aside, um, right? It's I think it's easier to root for that group of people. Um, but there is that same kind of thing of, well, if we map this more into the real world and we think about that for a second, like these people have tremendous powers. Maybe not somebody like Cap, but certainly somebody like Wanda or Vision, right? You can understand the impulse to, it's almost a gun control argument of, right? They have this capacity to do things to cause much greater harm than the average person does just with their own two hands. Um, and so, you can understand the impulse to want to regulate that, control that, however you want to frame it. So it's hard to, in the abstract, to say, well, the Superhero Registration Act is completely wrong. But in the context of the story, and again, knowing the history of event and Hydra or AIM or some other group, right? They're just going to wind up infiltrating this system and abusing it and whatever. And so you can kind of like uh, uh, use the rules of narrative to say that's a reason not to have this registration act and not to have this oversight, because in story terms it's not going to work out. But that logic doesn't work out in the real world. And so I think this is an interesting way to think about. You mentioned government corruption, institutional corruption. I think that's exactly the challenge that we're facing right now. Of there's a lot of mistrust in our institutions, and at least some of that is warranted, right? And so that leads to a lot of uncertainty, introduces a lot of noise into our political process, where the processes that should lead us to true conclusions, we can't trust them. And so we have to take a lot more of that people feel like they have to take a lot more of that into their own hands. If I can be forgiven for mentioning another podcast, I just
No, we do it a lot.
listened to. It's an old episode of Sean Carroll's podcast, which now I can't remember the name of. The physicist Sean Carroll does a podcast, and he had Cory Doctorow on like or 5 years ago, but I'm just now going through older episodes. And he was talking a lot about this. And he brought up the notion, and this is pre-pandemic. He was talking about vaccine concerns and people who are question vaccine safety because of their suspicions about the pharmaceutical industry. He's like, on some level, when these people say the pharmaceutical industry has some weird incentives and have done things that we don't entirely buy into. If they were talking about opioids, they'd have a point. They'd be talking about that. They would be justified in their mistrust. The data around vaccines are different than the data around opioids, right? And so we have reasons to think that they are safe in a way that we have reasons to think that opioids were not. But that lack of trust, that has been fostered in the pharmaceutical industry, it has some basis in reality. And so that's an institution or a set of institutions, both the combination of the companies and the regulatory bodies around them, that we just don't have the same level of trust in that we used to, and that impacts our decision making. That's an example. I live in the world of public health, and so those are the kinds of things that are on my mind more often. But there are plenty of other government institutions that you can point to and say, I have this concrete reason for being suspicious of them, or they have failed in this way in the past. But and so it's a little bit of it isn't paranoia if they really are out to get you kind of logic.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when you lack that, when you take away that grounding, right, then that distrust can lead you in all kinds of directions that don't necessarily correspond to reality. And so that doesn't mean that anything you might imagine accusing them of is correct. It just means that that there is reasons to be, it doesn't mean that trust has eroded somewhat, and we need to figure out how to build back that trust in these institutions, or build these institutions better such that they are trustworthy again, because that is kind of a necessary component of civil society and a functioning society on the scale that we operate on.
I know we're already over time a little bit, but I'm just going to share a couple more thoughts. We're going to run through Sam Wilson probably pretty quickly. He's not done too much as Cap yet in the MCU. But I thought it was interesting. You mentioned Scarlet Witch and Vision, and I think that brings up even some of the X-Men stuff that you'll probably be a part of conversations later on when we talk some of the X-Men complications of all this. But on the one hand, yeah, absolutely, Cap shouldn't be able to run around with a gun completely unsanctioned, right? Right. Tony should definitely not be able to have a full-on tank attached to his body unsanctioned. But then when you get to these people who, well, the Scarlet Witch, it's just who she is. Can you really sanction someone for existing? Like, oh, because you exist, you're a weapon, and we need to do something about that. That seems problematic, because then you're kind of regulating someone simply because of who they are. And that gets into our questions of like race. A lot of times America has done that, where we thought certain races were more dangerous, so we regulated them, right? It gets into questions of like the LGBTQ community, of like, can we regulate what someone's allowed to do with their own body, abortion, that kind of stuff. And it's like, this question gets a lot messier when we're getting into regulating people for being people, as opposed to regulating some guy running around with a gun. Yeah. Which even then, again, the corrupt system and all that, it's like, what level of sanction should there be? Because on the one hand, yeah, I get Cap not wanting to submit to a very clearly corrupt government. But on the other hand, dude, you can't just run around with a gun. Like, there's got to be some level of accountability there. What that looks like, I think, maybe is a little bit different than what the government proposed, but I still think there should have been more conversation at the table to figure out what that should look like. And then, I'm going to go to schools again when we're thinking about some of these issues. Your teachers don't have that much free speech. Ron DeSantis in Florida can say, hey, we're not allowed to teach this or say this in public schools. Boom, bada bang, done. He can't do that as much with professors in college. Professors have a lot more free speech rights given to them from the Supreme Court than your teachers in your high schools do. And I think what you end up seeing is having that ability to say more and explore more opens up a better opportunity for learning in the college environment than what a lot of times happens with that more controlled environment in high schools. Which brings up the question of, so is that control actually taking away from the education experience? Because when we remove some of that, you see a better, more enriched education where people are not only learning more, but they're able to broaden their own horizons with what they understand about the world. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we should change how much free speech high school teachers have. Yeah, but so all of that just feeds into some of these same questions. I did want to again quickly go through just exactly what's been going on with Sam Wilson in the MCU. He's the new Captain America. At the end of Endgame, Steve Rogers goes back, lives his life with his true love, gives the shield to Sam. And in Falcon Winter Soldier happens. Sam's question is like, oh, I don't really want to be this. I think I'm going to be my own person. It's too much pressure to bear the shield because that comes with a whole legacy of how great Steve Rogers was, and he couldn't. Eventually, it kind of comes to this realization that the world needs that symbol of America, not in the sense of American government. Because if you notice, Cap is not American government. Often he goes against the American government. Cap stands more for American values of freedom, of being against government control is kind of an American thing, really. Really, these principles, justice, freedom, the American way, and all that kind of stuff. So Sam Wilson kind of comes in to represent this in his own way. And through a series of things you figure out during the blip, when everybody was snapped out of existence, the lines of countries kind of disappeared because there wasn't enough people to really reinforce borders. So the world was kind of able to work together better. And then all of a sudden, everyone's back. Boom, the borders are back. And you have people who have spent these 5 years living in another country who all of a sudden are illegal immigrants. Out of nowhere. Like, bam, now you're an illegal immigrant. It's like, what? I've been here for 5 years. I've already started a family here. I've already done this. So, it brings up a lot of questions of immigrants, of borders, border safety, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the series, I just recommend everyone watch Falcon and Winter Soldier. When Falcon does finally own up to his mantle as the new Captain America, he gives this speech of just kind of responsibility, the responsibility of the government and responsibility of individual citizens, not to, some of this other stuff we're talking about of oversight or any of that, but rather just the responsibility to just treat others well, to not put people through unnecessary garbage for our own political means and for our own gain and that kind of stuff. I think it was a beautiful speech there at the end of what justice truly should look like for all, not just with the border stuff, but just with people's safety, with people's lives, with people's ability to enjoy who they are. It's a beautiful speech. Really look up that speech. But yeah, do you have anything you wanted to say about the Sam Wilson Captain America run? Sorry.
I think the other important piece of that that is touched on somewhat in that show and references another really great Captain America story from the comics, the origin of Isaiah Bradley and Eli Bradley.
Yeah,
is that right?
that was good stuff.
This idea that actually, Steve Rogers wasn't the first American super soldier. He was the first white super soldier, and there was a history of experimentation on black soldiers and black people beforehand to kind of get the kinks worked out, so to speak. And maybe that's not such a great word choice of phrase, but to the reality is that they went through this experimentation process and it didn't go right every time. And there are men who are left with physical and mental consequences of that, and they're not allowed to talk about it. And so it obviously maps clearly to things like the Tuskegee experiments, where just unethical medical experimentation was done on Black people, and because it's fictional, because it's an action TV show, and there's lots of other things going on. I think you can make the case that maybe not all the depth of that issue is unpacked in the show, but I think it's useful in the sense of bringing it to attention, a part of history, just bring more attention to it, even though many people may be aware of it, just bring more attention to what's been done, and then the need to continue to address those things, and the need to realize that even though some of these specific activities have stopped, right, that has left lingering issues of distrust in the medical community, right? We just talked about distrust in different institutions and so forth, right? And the Black community has a lot of good reasons to be mistrustful of various aspects of the medical community and the way that and where medicine and public health and government all intersect, right? There's good reason to be distrustful there, but that has consequences of, again, distrusting things that actually are for their benefit. But how do we build back that trust so that they can receive those benefits, and not just say, well, don't you know what's good for you? Like that's clearly not the answer, right? It's building back that trust and restoring relationships and restoring confidence. So reckoning with that real history is important, and so in that sense, I appreciated that aspect of the show, even though I'm sure there's plenty to criticize there in terms of, well, why didn't they get into this, or they could have handled this better, what have you. But
yeah, no, for sure, and that that even adds to there was a certain scene where the cops pulled him over when he's not in costume, because basically implied just because he is in fact a person of color, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, this is gross. And I think Sam Wilson's Captain America in the comics, and what we're going to see in the movie, and we already started to see in the show, is there's a lot of issues that a white Captain America couldn't address, right? That are still issues of freedom, justice, the American way. When we're thinking of racial justice, when we're thinking of justice at the border and for immigrants, what does that look like? And of course, just like when the comics came out, it's going to piss a lot of, white people who don't understand and think about these things, who feel like they're the victim. It's going to piss a lot of them off. But I think it's an important message to get out, even if we don't all agree with everything. And it's important to look at it through the lens of the character of Captain America, this character that represents justice and freedom for all, and just seeing what these things really look like through that lens. It's fascinating stuff. I love Sam Wilson's character. I love the actor they chose for him. I think he's doing pretty good, and that show was easily my favorite MCU show so far. But again, I'm biased. I love political thrillers, and I love Captain America, so very biased. All right. So did you have any other just like final thoughts when we're talking about Captain America, the MCU, politics, any of that? Are you ready to go ahead and wrap this one up?
I think I said everything I have to say, but yeah, with you, I look forward to more Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson, Captain America. Yeah. Please give him multiple movies as a lead, just like Chris Evans got.
Yeah, I can't wait for that next movie with Harrison Ford being the Red Hulk, right? That's gonna be. Oh no, he's being General Ross, who is the Red Hulk. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. No, I'm. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well then, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Man, I love getting to talk about Captain America. Thank you for joining me, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Instead of recommendations at the end for this series, we're going to ask everybody, what real life politician do you think would be most likely to enjoy your favorite movie? We all are just guessing, for the record. We don't know that. I think I don't know that much about politicians, personal lives especially. But I told you guys earlier, I have like a 3-way tie for my favorite movie. I'm gonna stick with today's episode. I'm gonna go Captain America: Winter Soldier. I actually really think that Joe Biden and I could probably enjoy that movie together. He seems like he likes Captain America movies. He just seems like the kind of guy, Andy, what's your movie, and which politician you think would be most likely to enjoy it with you?
Yeah, usually my answer to favorite movie is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And by the look on your face, we might have to unpack that at some future time, but we'll just leave it at that. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I'm getting to be one of the first people to answer this question and go with the fairly first base answer of Barack Obama, because he seems like of all the sort of national politicians of late, the one who's sort of most tapped into pop culture, and especially pop culture like that that's a little bit less prestigious, maybe we'll say, or a little bit less like wrapped in the flag, America, feel good kind of stuff. He's the only person that I could imagine getting into that movie in the same way. Whether he would or not, I don't know, but I couldn't even begin to imagine anybody else even putting it on. So that's my answer.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Oh man, I feel like I should have said that. I guess we're not asking who would enjoy it with us the most, because I feel like I could hang out with Obama and have a good time. We don't even need to talk about politics. He just seems like a down to earth guy. But anyway, guys, please rate and review our show on Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. Just those kind of things really help other people find the show. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Again, we want to do a big thanks to Aaron Hardy for supporting the show. Make sure you check out our other primarily political episodes down below in the description. We have a lot of good ones coming up. They're going to be talking about Galactica soon. We're going to talk about what was the other one? Oh, X-Men. They're going to talk about the X-Men, Inhumans. We're going to do an episode on Fallout, the Fallout series of video games. So we got a lot of really fun ones coming up for the next 7 weeks. And past that we'll be doing some more, but right now we're just doing 8 weeks of bonus episodes with these. So tune in, don't miss any of it. It's going to be a great time, and I thank you guys for listening. Remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priest.